Today, I want to talk about masking. And before anything else, I want to say this slowly and clearly. If masking is how you're getting through the day right now, you're not alone. Literally thousands of us are doing it. There is no shame to it. And this episode is not about telling you to just be yourself. It's not about ripping off the mask. And it's definitely not about forcing authenticity before your body feels safe. If you're new here, this podcast is a space where we talk honestly about trauma, dating, neurodivergence, and what it's like to move through the world on high alert. You don't need to have heard any of my other episodes here to be here, because for many of us, especially those with ADHD, autism, complex trauma, masking wasn't a choice we made later in life. It was something we learned very early. It may even have been before we started to speak, sometimes before we even know there was another way to be. So if the idea of unmasking makes something in you tighten rather than relax, I want you to know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You're just responding wisely to your history. Masking didn't break you, it just helped you to survive. And I think that's a really big deal. Masking is often talked about like it's deception, like it's being fake, and that it means that you're hiding who you really are. But just that framing itself never sat right with me. And I've always questioned it, because masking isn't lying. To me, it's adaptation. It's your nervous system doing what it's designed to do, learning how to keep you safe in the environment that you were in. It's reading the room, it's noticing who's unpredictable, adjusting your tone, your expression, your needs. And it's becoming easier to manage than your feelings. And if you're very good at it, people often praise you for being strong or resilient or low maintenance or so easy to be around. I know this sounds like a compliment, but until you realize how much of yourself had to be edited out to earn it. I mean, I still do it now, and I don't know how else to be, but I do take more time to check in with myself, whichever relationship I'm in, be it romantic, friendship or familial, I check, does this feel good? I reflect more frequently than, to see if I was masking, and try to learn from it so that I actually have a choice if I need it. And I want to be really clear about this, because masking takes intelligence. It takes emotional awareness, pattern recognition, the ability to track other people's moods and expectations in real time. That's certainly not weakness. I think that's a real skill. And honestly, some of you could probably run entire organizations based on how well you manage other people's emotions. And the problem was never that you learnt to mask. The problem is that you were never given a place where you didn't have to. And this is where trauma, especially early trauma, changes the conversation completely. When you grow up in environments that are unsafe, inconsistent, or emotionally unpredictable, your nervous system doesn't wait for adulthood to adapt. It adapts immediately. So masking doesn't show up as a strategy you choose. I mean, how can a 5-year-old choose a strategy? It shows up as who you become. Before language, before conscious memory, before you have the option to decide anything at all. And that's why for so many people with ADHD, autism and CPTSD, masking feels inseparable from identity. And it's just not something that you put on. It's something that grew alongside of you. So when professionals or social media voices say you just need to unmask, I notice how that lands in my body. And for me, it doesn't land as freedom, but as risk. Because if masking kept you safe when you were young, then your nervous system doesn't experience unmasking as neutral. It experiences as exposure. And exposure without safety isn't healing. It becomes, without safety, it isn't healing. It becomes destabilizing. And this is why I don't believe the goal is to stop masking, but learning that you have a choice. Because masking itself isn't the problem. The problem is when it's the only option that your nervous system knows. When masking is automatic, like it's an unconscious action, it's still running in the background even when you're exhausted. Choice changes everything. There's a massive difference between masking because you have to and masking because you choose to. One is survival, one is agency. And most of us weren't given the conditions to develop that distinction early in life. And we just learned that this is how I stay safe. So when people frame healing as dropping the mask, it misses the point. The work isn't to remove it, it's to be aware of it. Some environments may still be unsafe, and some people haven't earned access to your full nervous system. Some spaces still require you to be careful, contained, or strategic. And that doesn't make you dishonest. It simply makes you discerning, as masking can still be protective, necessary, and wise. And just so to be clear, and I want you to hear this as it often goes unsaid, you don't have to share everything. You are allowed to keep parts of yourself private. Unmasking is not a moral achievement. It's not proof of healing. There's no scorecard, and you don't get bravery points. You don't owe it to anybody, but only what feels good for you for the right reasons. And it's not something that should ever be forced by professionals, by partners, or by social media. And if unmasking doesn't feel safe in your body, then it's not resistance, but it's information that you just need to listen to. And this is another piece of information that just matters. For those of us who started masking young, that mask isn't separate from identity. It's shaped how we relate, how we communicate, even how we function. So masking can feel less like self-expression and more like self-erasure. Does that mean something to you like it does to so many others? I mean, it doesn't need fixing. You're not too attached to the mask. You're just simply honouring the part of you that learnt how to survive. And honestly, if masking were as easy to switch off as some advice suggests, we'd all be doing it already. No one is out here clinging to exhaustion for fun. And your nervous system isn't stubborn when it's protecting itself. So instead of asking, how do I unmask? A gentler question might be, where do I already have choice? Even a small one. Maybe it's not the mask. What if it's something else? And I've been thinking about something as I've sat with all of this. And we talk a lot about masking as if it's the thing that exhausts us. But I'm starting to wonder if that's the full story. What if it's not the masking itself that's draining us? What if it's the shame that we've been carrying about it? Because masking on its own can be functional. It can help us get through work, navigate relationships, stay regulated in environments that ask a lot from us. And it can also help us to achieve amazing things that we may not have been able to do without masking. Now that's thinking for a minute. What feels exhausting isn't always the mask. It's what we add to it. The constant overthinking, the self-monitoring, the quiet, relentless questioning. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Am I being fake? Am I doing this right? That internal commentary never really switches off. Well, it certainly doesn't my brain. And I don't think that's because there's something wrong with us. I think it's because we learned very early that being different came with consequences. So we tried to get ahead of it. We didn't become self-critical out of nowhere. Many of us were analysed, corrected long before we learned to do it ourselves. So self-analysis became a form of protection, not because we were harsh, but because we were being watched constantly. And I don't think we sabotage ourselves. I think we protect ourselves using tools that once mattered. Being hard on ourselves wasn't cruelty. It was protection. Self-criticism became a way to stay alert, to stay connected, to reduce risk. But carrying that level of self-surveillance day after day, year after year is exhausting. So maybe we're not tired because we're masking. Maybe we're tired because we've been at war with ourselves while doing it. Masking and judging ourselves for masking. Adapting and believing we shouldn't need to. That's double labour. And if that resonates, if you felt bone deep tired, even when you're coping, I want you to hear this. You're not exhausted because you're failing at healing. You may be exhausted because you've been carrying too much shame for too long. What would happen if the mask didn't need to be justified? What would soften it if you weren't constantly asking yourself to be different? What if the relief doesn't come from unmasking, but from stopping the self-attack? I'm not saying that you should not let yourself off the hook, but it's letting your nervous system just have a rest. Masking doesn't become a choice by stopping it. It becomes a choice when we can notice it without shaming ourselves, and then let our nervous system know that it has options. So I want to pause here for a minute, not to ask you to do anything or to change anything, but just to notice. Because when you have awareness, real awareness, it's already a form of choice. And if you want a question to sit with, it's not, how do I unmask? Maybe it's this. Where do I mask because I have to? And where do I mask because I've learnt to? Not, even though I might not need to anymore. And you don't need to answer it today. You don't need to journal about it or analyse it or fix it. Just noticing is more than enough. Some masks may never fully come off anyway. However, they might soften, they might shift, or they might only come off in very specific places or with very specific people. And that doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that you're respecting your nervous system. And for people with early trauma, safety isn't an idea. It's more like a sensation, and your body gets a vote. And I also want to name something that I think is really important. The version of you who learnt to mask, especially the child, it wasn't doing anything wrong. They weren't being manipulative or weak, but they were intelligent as they learnt how to stay connected and how to reduce harm. That's really clever. They learnt how to survive, and that's not nothing. That's really something. And I think that deserves huge respect, not criticism. You don't heal by shaming the strategy that kept you alive. Growth for people like us isn't about stripping the layers away. It's about adding safety, capacity, adding voice, and adding those places where you don't have to perform. And the mask doesn't have to be ripped off. It naturally loosens when the body feels safe enough. And that's why I don't see masking as something to overcome. I see masking as something to understand, not something to get rid of. And before I close this episode, I want to say something else. Masking didn't make you weak or fake, and it didn't mean that you were failing at being yourself, unlike we're told all the time. Masking meant that you were paying attention. It meant that your nervous system learned how to keep you safe in a world that didn't always meet you with care. And that deserves credit. You don't need to stop masking to heal. Honestly, you really don't. You don't need to unmask everywhere or with everyone, and you don't need to rush yourself towards some imagined version of authenticity that ignores your history. Healing for people with early trauma looks like choice. Small choices, simple or quiet choices, sometimes invisible to anybody else. And some days the choice will still be to mask, because that's what works. That's not regression. It's an inner wisdom, that you created. And I'd like to know if this episode stirred anything inside of you, something you might feel a bit tender out now. And I want you to remember to take a moment if you need to. And you don't actually need to do anything with what you've just heard. You just need to let it settle. Think about it, process it. And if listening brought up a question, something you haven't been able to share, to name, or something you've been carrying quietly, I have actually created a space for that, and it's called Dear Ilja. And you can send me a question anonymously if you want, and I'll respond honestly, gently, and without telling you what you should do. Because some questions are too messy for Google. And you'll find the link in the show notes, and you are welcome there if and when it suits. And hear this, masking didn't break you. It helped you to survive. And now slowly, on your own terms, you get to choose. As always, I want to say, until next spiral.